Thanks already about the collaboration, and I do hope that we can really have a good discussion in this hour. I promise that we are not solving all the problems on the world, but at least if we could inspire the participants and all of us a bit, that's a good way to move on. So I feel a little bit that the summer is over and we are really in the business at the moment. So it's like the new school year has started. And I think that we can celebrate that on the coming weekend, on the coming week, where there will be the UN Summit of the Future. And I think that this webinar is really, really timely, just to wake up a little bit on the perspective of global citizenship education and how exactly that could really enrich the whole implementation of the Agenda 2030 in all of its aspects. And just some point of view, I checked in the morning about the latest version of this so-called Pact for the Future, what the member states are negotiating at the moment. There's 11 times mentioned the word of education in the context of poverty or inequality, of course, in the science contexts, technologies, innovations, of course, in the early childhood and the children and young people. Somehow you can read it that also a little bit on the different places of the document. I would really hope that there could be a little bit more about lifelong learning perspective, so really understanding about the role of the global citizenship education throughout the life, so that we can really make the meaningful progress in the planet, including everybody's resources and motivation to really live in harmony. So I do hope that that's could be the spirit, and I'm really sure that exactly this webinar, together with the three excellent panelists, which I'm going to introduce in a second, and what we have asked them to highlight. There are two guiding questions. First one is looking at the global policy framework in place. Where are the opportunities to ensure we achieve quality, inclusive global citizenship education and lifelong learning for all? And the second question is that what are the potential solutions to the challenges in implementing these policies? They're quite general, big questions, but I'm sure that our absolutely great panel can really give their best guidance and best guesses and some kind of inspirational wording for us. I'm shortly introducing all of them, and then I will give the floor for the first one. So the first one will be Professor Paul Walsh. Is the Vice President of Education and Director of the SDG Academy at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And he is on secondment from University College Dublin, where he remains a full professor of international development studies, director of the UCD Master Science in Sustainable Development in partnership with the SDG Academy, and president of the Statistical and Social Inquiry Society of Ireland. And he has received the PhD in economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And he has many fellowship positions, just naming a few of them, in Ireland, in Marie Curie, in Brussels, in ESA in Bonn, RSI in London, etc. And he has held academic positions in Trinity College in Dublin, also in KU Leuven, Harvard University, and Columbia University. And I think that he's definitely bringing quite a lot of information for us from those point of view. Then we have another very, very well-known personality, Professor Leonardo Garnier, who is the former special advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations to the Transforming Education Summit, which I think is a very familiar event for many of us online. Leonardo is an economist with a PhD from the New School of Social Research in New York and from the University of Costa Rica. And previously he has been the Costa Rican Minister of Public Education and the National Planning and Economic Policy. And as a professor and an academic at the University of Costa Rica, he has really published several articles and books, and really is regular writer in many places at the moment. And then we also have Ms. Temilade Salami, who is our youth leader from Nigeria, representing Global Partnership for Education. She's also the founder and executive director of the EcoChampions. She has spent last 5 years leading a group of over 200 young environmentalists across 26 African countries. She also has published several books, mainly focused on the environmental thing and how to bridge the climate education gap in Africa. She has also launched the Climate Education Leaders Fellowship in Africa and is the member of UNESCO SCD4 Youth Network. So, like you heard, we really have a lot of competencies in this webinar today, not at all undermining the expertise of the audience as well. So I'm already now mentioning that please participate on the questions and the discussions as well. We're trying to limit, and we will limit the space for all the speakers in 6 minutes so that we really have the time for collective discussions and raising your point of views. But further ado, I will first invite Patrick or Paul. I think you hope that you're using Paul, either Patrick. So Paul, happy to have you here, and over to you.
Okay, thank you for the very kind introduction. So it's a joy to be here with Bridge 47 and IDEA. Do fabulous work on promoting global citizenship and sustainable development education. And it's also, it's very nice to be on the panel with everyone, including Leonardo, who did such great work on the Transforming Education Summit, which has a huge legacy for us here today as well. So the SDG Academy, please visit us. We're known for content in terms of the MOOCs we have up on edX and other platforms, but we have been working hard to mobilize this content into degrees or HR runs of governments, including the Irish government, or into corporates, kind of corporate training, because free content doesn't necessarily find a home. You have to mobilize it and incentivize it in a partnership. We do service some interesting, what I call communities of practice, including Mission 4.7 and the OER implementation of the OER recommendation in UNESCO. And we are involved in thought leadership, doing more blogs and publications and events in the UN, etc. So the one maybe to watch out for Action Day is Peace Not War, and I see David Donoghue is in the room, and he'll be a keynote speaker at that, and we will be promoting sustainable development education for our global citizenship and the role of peace and education for peace as well. This course we did over the summer, which is very popular. It's basically training for the Summit of the Future. We went through all the policy briefs and chapters, and we backed it up with academic videos. It was kind of an overlay course, but it has done very well. But we will update it when we get the outcome of the Pact for the Future, and we'll work towards the World Social Summit next year, because that's the final installment of our common agenda. So just to remind everyone, I know everyone in this room is a specialist in Mission 4.7, but here it is, SDG 4, Target 7. And the good news is when we start interviewing people now, we are beginning to see people in their primary school, in their high school and undergraduate and work experience being all about sustainable development, which wasn't the case a few years ago. I think most of the older people in this room will have a story about when they pivoted away from STEM. Like me, I was a maths for economics teacher, a statistics person, and I had to pivot away to embrace this type of agenda. Just to show you what I'm looking for in the Pact for the Future, the exercise I'm just going to do this morning is take revision for the Pact for the Future. And just as Rilli did there about looking for terms like education, I just want to see, what was I looking for? So the first thing is, when we walked into the Transforming Education Summit, there was a paper, I think, by UNESCO on learning poverty. And it was quite shocking, in a kind of a survey of 10-year-olds across the world, that only 1 in 3 could actually understand the paragraph written in their own language. Because I think most of us were thinking we're getting away from literacy issues or getting away from participation in primary and secondary. We thought the MDGs were achieved, but that's actually absolutely not true. So it gives us this starting point, like for those based in Ireland in particular, and I see Anne Dolan in the room as well, like suddenly we have a new Leaving Cert course being rolled out in climate action and sustainable development, but and it's been mainstreamed across, the junior cycles and etc. But, in a lot of places across the world, even the STEM, even the traditional focus is actually very, very poor. Never mind transforming it towards, sustainability and education for global citizens, etc. So our starting point is very low, and this reminded us of that. The other big outcome of the test, and of course Leonardo will confirm or not, is the focus on financing for sustainable development. And this was the sort of figures we were shown by UNESCO about the share of global public investment in education and how concentrated it is into high income countries, right? So that really is not fair. We cannot have a world of peace and sustainable development if all the young people, are really not getting the finance or getting access to, or getting the quality of education and the composition of education that we really want them to have. And then the other thing that Jeffrey Sachs pointed out in a keynote to the test as well is that governments are recommended to spend whatever, at least 4 to 6% of GDP or get up to 20% of public expenditure on education. But given the tax base is so low in some kind of middle to low income countries, that leaves a gap that the Northern Hemisphere, and not just because of moral reasons, it's actually benevolent self-interest. We cannot have a world with this type of social inequality coming from education. And it is our best pathway to peace and sustainable development globally by investing in education. But somehow everyone agrees with this, but then when it comes to the SDG stimulus and looking at the components of expenditure, somehow education always goes down the list. And this is even true in a university when we start thinking about strategy for research and policy, etc. Somehow investment in education is a poor relation to other factors, but that has to stop. So then the last point before I look for the summit of the future is, so I'm looking for kind of curriculum issues, moving from STEM, like global citizenship issues, but also looking for this kind of idea of lifelong learning. But most importantly is how in a multilateral sense, we're coming together to actually build capacity in the developing world, particularly the poorest of the poor and the low income countries. That's what I want to see for education and global citizen education. We know it's made up of 5 chapters, which are there, and there is actually a digital compact as well to be signed, which is linked to chapter 3, and obviously there's the Future Generations Pact, which is associated with chapter 4. But the one comment I'll make is that I've given a talk before about SDG 4, and in SDG 4. It doesn't say anything about financing sustainable development or education. It doesn't say anything about curriculum. It doesn't say anything about global, it says something, obviously 4.7 says about lifelong learning. You actually have to go to goal 1 and goals 13 and goal 12 and goal 17 to actually build a complete picture for what you should be putting into education, and particularly financing and sustainable development, right? And curriculum and issues like that, and capacity building, training of teachers, etc. So it's actually not in SDG 4. And when we do an index of education, and doing what with Ender Murphy across the 169 targets or all the indicators, you'd be surprised how much it actually goes across the goals. And that's fair enough, because it's a comprehensive agenda. We're talking about society, economy, governance and environment issues, you know what I mean? So why not have education and all of these things, right? So in reading this Pact for the Future over the 5 chapters, I was very much aware of this, and it turned out to be the same again. So for example, when you go to the first point, or I'm calling it chapter 1, on sustainable development and financing for development, you actually see a very important point, which it says that we are aligned to the political declaration that was signed at the SDG summit last year. And of course, look at the paragraph that was in the political declaration in the summit last year, which was under the auspices of the General Assembly. And you see that's perfect for us, right? There you have everything. You have your lifelong learning, you have your focus on gender, you have all the things that you want, and even a commitment to the Transforming Education Summit. So that is a little sentence in the Pact for the Future but it actually brings to life the political declaration which the Irish and Qatari government worked so hard to create last year.
Perhaps, Paul, we can close it here, because I think that you might come back on your last point also on the questions.
I'm just going to 2 points and I'm gone then, right? So
one
is that nothing about education on chapter 2, peace and security, which is very worrying. A lot about education and STEM, actually, and capacity building, and a little bit on youth and future generations, but nothing really about education in transforming global governance. So it's kind of interesting that chapter 3 and 4 do the work for us, and chapter 1 and somehow peace and security and global governance is not there. And then finally, I did a word search for things like love, compassion, empathy, care, and they're not there. Now, there are other things there like peace and justice and respect and dignity and culture and indigenous, but I just think those who are promoting non-STEM skills would want to see those type of values and virtues outlined. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. I think that's really giving a, let's say, the good frame, but also linking that on the current document, what all the good documents, which are the guiding documents for the member states in the next week. But let's take the other perspective on the discussion. So Temilade, I hope that you join us as well. So great to have you here. So welcome. You will have your 6 minutes.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for bringing me on board. And I really love the conversation about education, which I think is one of the most important, SDG goals that we have. So very quickly, I'll be talking about the Global Citizenship Education, but most importantly, the challenges we have and the solutions and opportunities, that borders that. So very quickly, I'll be using my slide. For me, I always say global citizenship education is about teaching and learning for change. And when it comes to teaching and learning for change, it's not just about teaching or just learning, it's also about empowerment and giving agencies to people or learners. And it's to allow us learn and understand what the problems of the world are and how we can fix them in togetherness and not just in silos. And this also includes inclusivity, knowing that every learner, regardless of where they are, where they come from, or what they look like, they're able to create change. Now, I'm going to go to my next slide. For every policy, for everything we talk about in education, there are opportunities that abound. And the first one is inclusive education. We cannot talk about global citizenship education without inclusive education, which includes the fact that anyone, any learner, no matter where they come from, the country they come from, the color of their skin, the gender, they are able to learn and get quality education. We also have digital literacy, lifelong learning. Recently, we've been seeing a lot of emerging technologies on how we can advance education and also give access to many learners who are in different countries. We also have lifelong learning, which is something that is very core in the work that I do. We are all learning every single day, every single time, every single moment, no matter the age that we have or how old we think we are. Education is really a lifelong learning thing, and this is why it also goes beyond our classrooms and go outside the classroom as we grow in life. And the last one, which is the work that I do, which is education for sustainable development, which has to do with climate change, environmental sustainability. This is a core part of education that we also need to pay attention to. So many opportunities abound, and if we piece all of this together, we realize that education comes at the core and at the center of every sustainable development. Now, what are the challenges? Personally, for the past 6 years, I've been working in education in Nigeria and in Africa at large. And here are some of the challenges that I've seen. Some of them are spoken challenges and some of them are unspoken. The first one is lack of political will. In every country, in every nation, there are agendas. There are things that top the list of every political leaders. It might be poverty, it might be empowerment, it might be youth leadership. And I've seen so far, example for from the country that I come from in Nigeria, education might be on the list of their top priorities, but in real life, it is not. And I like to say everybody puts their money where their mouth is. So the way you naturally go to a budget officer and they see how much you have allocated to certain parts of your lives, it shows you where your money is going. It shows you where your interest is going. If you love to buy certain things, it shows you where you're spending your money. So no political leader can say that they love education or they love their country to grow and increase their citizenship education without putting their money where their mouth is and without putting their money or their budget allocation into education. So political will is a very big issue that we've had to deal with and challenge. And the second one is lack of funding. Most times when I come into education conversations, there's always a missing piece. People talk about education, we talk about learners, we talk about sustainable development, but hardly do I hear about financing, just like Paul mentioned. There is no quality education without proper financing. And this is something that I say on every single panel that I find myself. There's so many issues that border around learning. For example, there's currently the schools just resumed globally, and this is a new academic year. As I speak, there are thousands of children who cannot access education, not even talk less of quality education in a state in Nigeria because the state is flooded. And now we see how these issues intersect because there is flooding, these children cannot go to school. And for these children to go to school, there has to be a lot of interventions that will cost a lot of money. Now, where did this money come from? How do we ensure that the national budget is going into situations like this to ensure quality education for these learners? Now, the other problem we faced is silo working, which is something that you can see that is quite prevalent in a lot of youth organizations or even governmental bodies. In Nigeria, for example, we have about three ministries that serve everything in environment. Ministries and agency. We have the National Climate Change Council. We have we have Ministry of Environment. There's just so many organizations and bodies and ministries, individuals working and doing different things in different places. However, we come together, bring in that synergy. We partner with educators, partner with government institutions, partner with youth leaders, and make sure that we're not repeating solutions over and over again, right? So the other challenge we've had is teacher exclusion, and this is something so dear to my heart because at the core of my work is climate communications and education. While I have worked as a formal teacher and an informal teacher, talking about climate change and education for the past 7 years, I've seen that whenever I go for events or even in core discussion settings, we're coming up with policies. Teachers are excluded every single time. 90% of the meeting I attend, maybe teachers just come to the meetings 20% of the time. And it's really sad because all the all the learners spend majority and chunk of their time in schools. These are teachers that are going to teach them before they go back home. So what are they learning? Who is teaching them? Maybe we start from that. So if the teachers are not knowledgeable about topics like education for sustainable development, they don't know what's going on, in the UN Summit of the Future, they don't know what to teach their kids. So it's still what they know that they have to teach. Now we need to shift our focus and prioritize teachers, right? And very quickly, how can we achieve quality, inclusive global citizenship education and lifelong learning for all? Like I always say, problems exist, but solutions also exist. And I'll run through that very quickly. The first one is intergenerational dialogue and solutions, which is why I really love this panel we're on. I mean, you have somebody that is young like me talking about these things. So there are different perspectives coming into the conversations. I love to say that we cannot create solutions for a generation that we're not really involved with. So when I see institutions coming up with educational policies that do not include their young people as a nation, as a body, as an institution or an organization, there is a big problem because there's no point creating a solution for a future that those people are going to live in and they are not involved from the conversation from start to finish. Now, I also like to say, on the other hand, that young people must understand that there's a lot of wisdom to glean from people who have come before us, because these are the people that understand the previous times and they also have knowledge that they can share to help us move the needle on inclusive education and citizenship education. And they also know the history. So it's very important that we bring in their perspective to balance the history and the new emerging solutions that we have. Now, the second solution is contextualized learning. When I started writing my book, the first thing I did was to go into a bookshop. I went to the bookshop, I searched for books on recycling, And to my shock, the books were written, so many examples like lithium batteries for 3 years old, 4 years old learners. And I was really hurt because I'm trying to teach kids that don't know what a lithium battery is. Their parents don't even have money to buy them a bicycle to ride to school instead of transportation. Now, when you buy that book and you bring it into an African context, are the solutions right? Yes, but do they fit into the Nigerian context? Do they fit into the African context? And that was why I started writing my book. So in my book, you will see characters that look like the people I'm trying to teach. You see solutions that look like the people I'm trying to teach. And now they can take action and also have that sense of agency to be able to create change in their own community. No matter what the global policy is about climate, about education and sustainability, citizenship education, we must bring it back home. What works for Ireland does not work for Nigeria. What works for Nigeria does not necessarily work for Kenya. Different realities and different solutions. The third solution is co-creation and adaptation. I've seen many people go into communities to create solutions for the people. But every single time we talk about education, we must understand that it is a co-creation. It is a co-creation. It must involve learners, it must involve teachers, it must involve curriculum developers, it must involve national agencies, it must involve government bodies. Everybody has to be seated, including the learners who we are trying to teach in school. Now, the next solution is
Perhaps,
accountability, holding our political leaders. This is my last slide. Holding our political leaders very, very accountable, and then also funding, like I mentioned, and continuous professional development for our teachers. Thank you very much, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, really.
thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to hand over to Leonardo. Over to you.
Thank you, Rilli. Good afternoon, or in my case, good morning, and thank you for having me in this webinar on the role of global citizenship education. As Temilade made clear, the goals of a good education go beyond acquisition of new information or knowledge. In his vision statement for the Transforming Education Summit, the UN Secretary General said that education must aim higher as it prepares the learner in 4 critical capacities: learning to learn, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. We need learners of all ages to learn what is relevant and to learn it well. Learners must acquire the capacity to find and understand new information and knowledge, and to develop other learning skills, from their capacity to use language to communicate properly to their logical, mathematical, scientific skills. All this is key to a good education, but we know it is not enough. In a world in which it is increasingly difficult to distinguish what is true from what is fake, or worse, in a world in which the moral imperative to fight for what is right is increasingly blurred or diluted, learners cannot go through life without the capacity to discern truth from false information, and especially without the capacity to develop their own ethical criteria, their own civic values. So we must educate for culture, for human rights, and for a fair and sustainable development. We must educate in those values that lead us to live together with respect, with empathy, with solidarity, with affection, recognizing and accepting each other in our rich human diversity, and understanding our responsibility for the preservation of our only natural environment. We must educate for the critical but sensible exercise of democratic citizenship, and this implies the complex challenge of making collective decisions. This is something which is critical to democracy, to make collective decisions in a fair and sensible way while respecting minorities and the diversity within our societies. We must educate to confront injustice and to close those gaps that increasingly separate us, as the graph that Paul showed us. We must educate to share in the joy of others as well as to share in their suffering. We must educate to eradicate the 2 basic causes of poverty: inefficiency and privilege. We must educate, finally, to live in the company of others without fear and without instilling fear, and sheltered by the same ecosystems. Okay, all this sounds very nice, I know, but it's far from easy. That is why literacy in the 21st century means much more than just reading, writing, and doing basic arithmetic, which are essential but insufficient. Literacy in the 21st century means being able to understand the world in which we live and to express ourselves in the symbols of our time. Those are, of course, the symbols of science and technology, but also the symbols of the arts and politics, of sports and leisure, of culture and togetherness at all levels. This was the vision in which some years ago we promoted a curricular reform in civics education in Costa Rica under a somewhat pompous label. We called it Ethics, Aesthetics, and Citizenship. With respect to ethics, we understood that ethics is not something that can be learned as mere information, as received knowledge, or as it is frequently taught as a sermon, but rather as an experience. It has to be an acquired conviction. Ethics is better learned by confronting students with ethical dilemmas. In this process, it is particularly important, and I emphasize this, for teachers to avoid the typically adult temptation of dictating or explaining the right way of solving the dilemma. On the contrary, their role is to stimulate their students to confront different positions through respectful and tolerant discussions that allow them to develop their own ethical criteria through which to evaluate those dilemmas, to sustain their own position, to propose solutions in dialogue with their fellow students. With respect to civic education, it is not enough for it to be part of a specific subject at school, as it certainly should be, but it must permeate the whole curriculum and even mark the entire life of the school and the relationship between the school and the community. The interaction between students, the relation between students and teachers, the relation of students and teachers with the principal, the role of the student board or student government, the way in which they play games and sports, the way in which they eat together, the way in which they compete or collaborate in different projects. These are all opportunities to learn about civics. There are values that are fundamental in ethical and citizenship education, values such as justice, fairness, and equity, freedom in its broad sense as capacity, dignity as the right to feel respected and to live a good and decent life, and especially as the right not to be humiliated, not to be treated as less than anyone else for reason of ethnicity, sex, gender, religion, or any other differences. Values like solidarity and empathy, our identification with the other. We must make sure that our curricula, our pedagogical practice, and every interaction at school effectively contribute to the learning of those values and attitudes. And finally, and this is particularly important in the complex, conflicted, changing, and even dangerous world we are living in order to understand our complex identity, it is important to learn and to value our history, our roots, not in order to remain trapped or stuck in them, but rather to grow with them and from them. The context of today's learners does not stop at the town or the neighborhood, nor at the province or the country in which they live. They are increasingly part of an enormously diverse global community of people, of young people who share both dreams and nightmares across the planet, who face the same threats and anxieties, not only for their personal future, but also for our collective future. In that context, a relevant global citizenship education must be an education that allows us all to learn how to become active citizens, how to exercise our rights, and how to assume our civic responsibility towards others and in the construction of a dignified, just, and sustainable future for all. And of course, we must learn to enjoy the process, as life itself should be for everybody to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonardo. Indeed, absolutely good points as well. And I think that all you three panelists, you managed to really give some kind of different point of views for the whole not so easy topic, I would say as well on that. I'm really conscious of the time, and thanks for all of those who has written already the questions on the file on there. And perhaps I somehow, when I was reading the first three ones and listening all the speakers, I think that you tackled that a bit already, each of you from the different point of view. But I think the key issue really is that how we can really get out of those silos, like Temilade was saying, that so many things happening in each of the silos. And I think that exactly talking about this, how the global economic, political, social, and environmental processes and systems and their relevance really matters, that how the people can learn wherever they are living or they are working. Are they really in the local communities or in the head of states level or wherever? So I think that these system thinking and understanding the systems really resonate. And equally, I think that the digital technologies, it's really the gift, but at the same time, it's really damaging quite a lot what we do. So there are both sides on that. And again, it's a tool, how we are going to use that. And then perhaps the third one is the civic space, because unfortunately we have that quite a lot of evidences on shrinking space at the moment. So perhaps I would be really happy to hear the short replies from each of you, somehow packaging all of these three. How does it really resonate for you, and what could we really do to exactly make the good, having the good, better move, better some kind of changes happening in the societies, that exactly it's the changes moving on the positive side. So may I ask first, Paul, what's your take of these three questions?
Yeah, no, so when we're in our master's course, for example, what we try to do is get everyone to start thinking about, on any action or policy or something you do as a household or citizen or in a corporate, like, so what are the social, economic, environmental, and governance dimensions of what you do, you know? And I think the tricky thing for Global Citizen, though, and it's very much part of this new ESG legislation on global supply chains, is that you can't just care about nature and people in your own neighborhood or in your own country. You really have to become aware of how you care for nature and people globally, you know? So, and that's the challenge, you know, that really is the challenge. But we can see in this European Parliament legislation for companies that if they have any problem on society or environment on their global supply chain, they can get fined up to 5% of their global turnover. So they have to start thinking about exactly what's happening on their global supply chain with respect to society and the environment. Then the next one is digital. So we have the Third World OER Congress in Dubai in November, and we're actually focusing on the digital transformation. We're having it alongside the Knowledge Summit. So we're very much thinking about how you can have open education resources, which the Academy has, but to make them, our solution is to put them into a library digital repositories, right? Under what we call, under principles of FAIR, as we call them, and CARE and FOREST. I'm not going to go into them, but the whole idea is that resources should be co-created by people in the global south and global north. They should be findable, interoperable, translatable, usable, really easy, all this sort of stuff. So I think now is the time with AI and technology to distribute that type of content and create that content all over the world, and also to have it used in corporates or schools or for teacher training or government or capacity building in governments and so on. So all of that is, you know, very much possible with the advances in technology. It's just getting the money and getting the tech people to think about these issues and apply their craft to these issues is the problem. It's the orientation and the mindset. And then the last question about the shrinking space of Global Citizen. I mean, again, you know, when I think of this agenda, and I'm an economist, and we think of general equilibrium theory, you know, you are the government, you are the household, you are the company. All of us in our spheres of influence do things where we do stuff in communities, where we do stuff in a political way, where we do stuff with corporates, even if we buy goods and services. And we can be an actor that internalizes any damage on people and nature in all of these spheres, right? So this kind of distinction, I understand what people are talking about, the civic space and kind of political arenas, particularly like the HLPF or something like that, right? I know what we're saying, but at the end of the day, wouldn't it be nice if all our missions and all our values were aligned, wherever we are, in a university or in a government or a corporate, where we all do our thing and we do not damage people or nature in our vicinity or globally. So therefore, it shouldn't matter to make this distinction between civil, corporate, government. We have to get to that place.
Thank you very much. Temilade, your thoughts?
For me, I think it's co-creation. That's the first thing for me. When we talk about solutions that affect everyone or problems that affect everyone, then everyone has to be seated at the table. Not literally, but they need to have a voice, a representation that brings in the perspective and the realities on ground. And the second thing is, I think for education, we should also talk more about financing, right? Very important, because it's usually always missing in the conversation, except you have people from such institution in that conversation. And the third thing is awareness. I've seen the divide or the huge gap, because Paul works in, education, I work in education, Leonardo, I've spoken on different panels with, works in education, works in financing, and you work in education. We know about these issues, but how do we bring it to a trader on the street? How do we bring it to a teacher in the school? Just deconstructing, the registers to something that people can relate to every single day. And the thing is, the more we are aware as a society, the more we can make demands from our political leaders. I'm going to give a very good example quickly. So during elections in my country, the things people ask for, it's really shocking that some of those things are not even in the global agenda. And you can't really blame these people, because it is what they know that they can make demands of or make demands for. So we need to educate everyone and also speak the language that everyone can understand, and try to break all of those things that we hear on the global stage to everyday lives for people around us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done. In that you managed very, very well. Leonardo, your thoughts?
Yes, very, very quickly. I think there are three problems. One is that people think that learning to live together is something that happens automatically, that you don't need to worry very, very much that people learn it every day. But the truth is that learning to live together is not automatic. To learn how to live together is as difficult, even more difficult than learning math. It requires curricular and pedagogical strategies. It should be treated as an educational challenge, and the educational system should really plan about how to teach these things. Of course, the digital could help. For example, we could have global student networks. We could have wonderful examples of, as I was saying, how to discuss ethical or civic dilemmas with students of different countries. And there could be lovely things that we could make, but there are challenges. One is connectivity, as we said at the summit. The other is capacity, especially the capacity of teachers for the creative use of digital tools. And then there is the challenge of content. We have to treat digital educational goods as public global goods, and this is something very important for the Pact of the Future. If we don't have this as public global goods, what will happen is that digital resources will be very expensive and they will be available only for the few. They will increase inequality. And finally, when we have short money for education, and as the graph that Paul showed, when we have very unequal investment on education, when money is short, subjects like civics and the arts and sports and learning to live are left out. And here I think that this is about politics. We need people, we need families, we need unions, we need different kinds of organizations to demand from governments a relevant education, an education that includes civics, that includes the capacity to learn how to live together. If you don't have that pressure from the community, you will not have it.
Thank you. And I think that you exactly touch upon a little bit on the question about the local and regional governments as well. And I think many of you were talking about this, some kind of the understanding that how exactly people are not alone, but they are really, really working together. So I think it's very, very well linked and answered already on that. Perhaps I think we still have the time to take perhaps one question. I know there are several people writing at the same time, of course, but let's take about this question: how do we actually change the behavior and the practices that keeps the power imbalance? They're undermining the systems on the inequalities, etc. I think that might be interesting to hear your quick reactions on that, because of course we don't really want to manipulate the people so that's brainwashing or whatever if we are really trying to go on in that way. But I think that how we can really respectively exactly how the system can support that exactly the people can really understand about that, what Paul was mentioned about this local and global at the same time. So any take off on that? Who would like to, any of my panelists who would like to start?
No, I'd like to I think one of the most important comments made, lots of good comments, and I know it's because of this Digital Global Compact, but I thought Leonardo was very strong in the tests about the digital public good, particularly, digital assets, and I'm not sure when I see what's happened after the tests, whether this is actually stayed, people have been strong on this, or even into the pack. I have to read the Digital Global Compact, but the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is that, and it answers the question about capacity a little bit, is that governments have to be able to own their own digital assets, run their own infrastructures and their own applications, and run health and education and social protection on their own. They do not need the likes of Google and Microsoft to do it for them. It's a massive mistake to think that governments are not good enough to run kind of tech, and that has to be run by the private, or even run by the private, regulated by the government. We have to go back to the basics of the public service, and people have to be trained, and young people have to come in, and they have to be able, for the public good and for global public good, to be able to run digital assets and digital infrastructures and so on. This is going to be a real problem. And it gets to the point that sometimes you can talk about behaviors, the bottom up, the role of the citizen. Sometimes you've got to attack the axis of evil in a way. You've got to, the academics and politicians and thought leaders have to actually, suddenly when they see something as structural as this, the ownership of digital assets, they've got to start screaming. We want open licenses. We do not want what's happening, because that will actually create a structural pathway and a digital divide, and will destroy any hope of what we want to do on this platform. I know it's not all about digital assets, but this is an example, though, where unfortunately the system kind of matters, and the design of the system, and people have to speak up against it. And I have to read the Global Digital Compact. We attacked this in Nairobi. We've sent lots of letters to the two co-facilitators of the Global Digital Compact because we thought there was a preference for the private over the public, and it is not good enough. And this potentially could damage education a lot if this progresses, basically.
Yeah, that's a good example that we still need to lobby about that. But any other comments, either Temilade or Leonardo?
Maybe I think that the problem here is that we face a terrible paradox. Now we know for sure that educational investment is not just socially necessary, that it is good, but that education actually pays in terms of economic returns. There are hundreds of research saying that education is an economic investment that pays. The problem is that both politics and business are centered on short-term results, short-term political results, short-term profits. And education is about long-term results. We need to shift to a long view. And for this, we must learn from history, both from success stories and from failures. And I think that the Pact of the Future is like the best place to have this long view on the role of education for this common future. And everybody says it, the World Bank says it, the IMF says it, but when it comes to government, then the same World Bank and the same IMF insist on the fiscal space, on the short-term view, and that's the vision we have to change.
Temilade, any reaction from your side? Any comments before I'm wrapping up?
None for this question. No.
Okay, is there any other question you would like to comment? I hope you see the document. Is there anything that you would like to just to pick up?
I think the question on what does building capacity in the developing world mean? I think for me, building capacity has to do with, first for me, technicalities, empowerment, co-created empowerment, and financing, right? So technicalities in terms of how do we ensure that all of the things that we're talking about, how do the policy papers translate to everyday lives of the people in the community or the people who work to make change in those communities. And secondly is also about empowerment, but co-created empowerment too. We don't go into communities or learning spaces to teach them what to do, because that's what we've been doing all this while. A certain set of people create the solution, we bring it to a certain sphere, and we expect that there is an uptake of these, solutions or suggestions without thinking about the local context of these people. And so far, there has also been proven results with solutions that are co-created or policies that are co-created. People are more involved, they have more agency, they are willing to do what needs to be done to move the needle on that solution. And the third one is financing. It's not just okay to come and say, this is what we need to do, but how do we get it done? Where do we source for the funding from, especially for developing countries and people who don't have access to the level of funding that certain people have access to. So there is an imbalance in resources that tallies to what we need to do. So if we have a global policy paper, we also need to take into consideration that there might be a global policy paper, but the realities are not necessarily on the same threshold. And that needs to inform how we carry out our solutions and also bring in these solutions into our local communities. So yeah, that's the question that really piqued my interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And it's always like we're just warming up and we need to end at the same time. So it's really, really pity that unfortunately we can't, in this format, we can't really collectively continue the discussion today, but I do hope that we can definitely find the ways how we can really continue that, because this is really everybody's business, and I think that we definitely find the solutions. Like I really like the Temilade's pointers as well on that there are the solutions. So we need to really put those on face and then really using those. But quickly trying to summarize about all the points about what you said, somehow I think that it's really important what Leonardo said about that learning to live together is not easy. I think that that's really is we need to accept that, but we need to still going ahead on all that, because that exactly is one starting point how we can really use everybody's competencies and finding the solutions for this world. Because none of us don't want to be the dictators who has all the so-called right decisions on all that. I think that it's not really sustainable. We need to really find the ways how we can really work together. And that's why I think that it's important that in all the levels, including the global to local. But we need to really have this understanding about the short term, medium term, and the long term. Understanding better that we can't really get everything ready quickly. It takes time if we want to get everybody on board as well. So accepting about that. But I think that the education is really the essence. It's really a fuel. Like Leonardo said earlier, it's really that if we don't really have the education as a basis, we can't really do anything on there. But the challenge really remains on that how we can really get that as a priority for the politicians. And that's why I think that all of us really play the important role to really challenge the politicians and finding the good argumentation why it's so essential for the future. And I think that there's really a lot of opportunities for us. Thanks, Paul, for mentioning about this technology meeting coming. So this is one of the digital meetings. So anyway, there are a lot of opportunities, not thinking that exactly the next week solving all the problems. No way. It's just for the one milestone and one kind of place where some of the people are coming together and discussing. But we need to really continue the collective effort so that we can really get the let's say the importance of the education to get the understanding better through. Because I really believe, like all the panelists, you say that a little bit in the different wordings, that exactly the education everywhere, not only in the education goal, but everywhere is so fundamentally important. And then it comes out of the silo approaches as well, that we can really get the better financing, better opportunities, better support for all of us to contribute in the better future.